so excited to have you here today to share your wisdom and your years of expertise. But for me, it's incredible because you are the one that inspired me to homeschool, and you have totally been my mentor over the years. So for me, it's really exciting to have you on here and for you to share a little bit about your story. I mean, starting at 10 years old, you were able to go through Europe and Asia pretty much every summer, right? About 3 or 4 months out of the year.
We went to Europe every summer. Asia, we went once in a while, not every year for us to Asia, but we did go there periodically.
So you have such a story, just the background. If you could take a couple minutes and just tell everybody a little bit about your background, your parents and how they came here and how you grew up, and then we'll get to the questions, because I think sometimes when we hear the background of what people have been through and their experiences, it really gives us a broader range and view of what their life was and some of the choices they made, right?
And what it became, which is sometimes quite different.
Absolutely.
Michelle, as I want to say this, that as wonderful as it is to you to talk to me, who was sort of the person who not dragged you, but maybe a little bit pushed you into this homeschooling path, a little push. I definitely wanted to do that. And I was thrilled when you decided to choose this path. For me, the thrill of seeing you and Natalie and other women, rec and men, but in particular, I think women are the leaders in this movement, understand the possibilities of home-based education and then work to share those possibilities with others and to make the journey that others are embarked upon more joyful, more fulfilling, and more successful is enormously satisfying to me. I mean, it is the culmination of everything I could have ever hoped for. So I'm thrilled. You know, I consider you one of my honorary children, though you have a wonderful mother and father of your own. But I am grateful that I had the opportunity to enjoy you for a little while you were a young person in my life too. It was
you were a huge influence in so many ways. So I can't thank you enough. And so excited for other people to learn from you today as well.
Well, let's hope so. But I'm excited to share my journey. Well, I'm going to launch into it. I want to say that, yes, you know, like everyone in my life, I had some exceptional experiences that helped me to see things in new ways. But I think that one of the things, this is important, my parents, I'll start. I was born in San Francisco, California, to young parents. My mother was just 20. My dad was 23, I think, when I was born. And I was just thinking, is that right? Yes. And they were both Holocaust survivors. By truly, one can only imagine divine intervention. They, unlike most of their families, escaped the fiery furnaces of Auschwitz and were or escaped being murdered on the banks of the Danube by the Nazi SS in Hungary. I will say that my parents did not share this story extensively with me or my one sister. I have one sibling, a younger sister who's 3.5 years younger than I am. They did not share this origin story, as it were, with us when we were young. It was too fresh and too horrific. So their big goal was to just make a happy life as much as they could for their 2 little girls. We had no family living near us. My mother's mother survived the war. So we were raised in California. My father was a professor. He came to the US on a scholarship. He was very fortunate to get out before the communist doors clanged shut. My mother, he came out on a scholarship when he was 19 to study in the United States. And my mother, he planned to go back to Hungary when he came. But while he was here, the communists completely took over. And my mother was able to get out miraculously and join my father, though she lived with friends because they weren't married yet, but they had been truly childhood best friends. They were both only children, best friends, and then sweethearts after the Holocaust. My mother, who had escaped during the last murderous year in Hungary, went back to Budapest. Her mother wouldn't even go back with her because she just couldn't go after the trauma. And most of my mother's family had been killed, she discovered. But my father, who was her dear friend, was still there. And then my dad got this scholarship and went to the United States, and she was mortified. She thought she'd never see him again. But he arranged for her to somehow come and live with a family. And so she did live with a family while he finished college. He made her go to night school, which she didn't enjoy. She didn't speak any English at the time. Wow. But my dad did graduate in 3 years with a bachelor's and a master's in economics, and then went to get his PhD. He was at the University of Washington in Seattle, and then went to get his PhD at the University of California in Berkeley. And they got married before he did that. And so that's how I ended up in California instead of being brought up in communist Hungary. So, I have perhaps much more important to my background, even than my travels, was that my parents had the experience of living under both fascism, which was murderous, and communism. Let me put it this way. They barely escaped. My mother was there at the beginning of the communist takeover of Hungary. And it was pretty amazing. She had actually one uncle who survived in Hungary. And he had restarted their business, his business. And her family's business was, her father had a big, beautiful store in Budapest, beautiful jewelry store. When the communists took over, they went to the door of her uncle's business, a group of them. They told them to give him to give them the keys and to show them the books. And they told him if he ever came back, he would be shot. So that is an interesting background, which I did not learn until much later in life, because my parents didn't want to share those stories. But I was the first baby born to my parents. They had 2 children, very beloved, I was cherished. And I think that was perhaps the thing that ultimately led me most into homeschooling, is that I was ready to cherish my own children. And at the moment when they would have begun school, I wasn't so eager to let them go. And when this idea came to me in a most odd way, it found a fertile field. But so I'll tell you a little more about me quickly. We moved outside of San Francisco. I went to regular public schools. I skipped a grade. I skipped 3rd grade. Then when I was in 6th grade, I think, my father who had been a professor, created and was appointed the director of a big study abroad program for the state university system. It was then a state college system in California. And so because of that, and because he liked to keep our family together, he organized it. He consulted on the side. He was not wealthy, but he got free airline travel from his consulting with airlines. He was an economist. And that's how my sister and my mother traveled with him every year when he went to visit all of his centers around the country, around the world that he had established. And that gave me a wonderful perspective on life. I realized how blessed we were, but I also realized how fantastic the rest of the world was and how interesting. And
your story, just with your background, even though you didn't know that from early on, and then just the difference in how you grew up, knowing, later on how your parents, what they went through and what they endured and how they wanted the very best for you, and look at the opportunities that they gave you and that it opened up for you to come, to be here in America and do what you were able to do. Yay. Thank you.
And I want to say one thing about that my father, we had all these unconventional opportunities, but he was totally committed to as was my mother. My mother became a teacher. While we were little, she went back and she finished college. She got a master's. She got a teacher's credential. She did her not home teaching, her student teaching, all of that. And my dad, as I mentioned, he was a professor, but he was an economist, and he consulted for a lot of organizations, including the California Teachers Association, the National Education Association. He was a big lobbyist that states and the government should give schools the resources they needed and should give teachers the respect and the compensation they deserved, because he always made it clear, as did my mother, that they felt that teaching was the most important profession in the world.
Yes.
So I want to say that.
I absolutely agree. Whether you're homeschooled or whether you're a regular teacher, it's huge because you're molding these kids to be the next generation.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Wow. All right. Well, Annette, you have so much you could say about you. I know you have multiple degrees from Yale and Stanford, and honestly, we could go on and on. And you touched a little bit on this, but what was the main catalyst for you to homeschool?
Well, I had never in my life heard about the idea of homeschooling, even though obviously I'd had all these great experiences. It was not a thing when I was a young mother.
Right.
But when my oldest child, and by the time my oldest child was 4.5, we already had 4 children. When my oldest child was not a little over 4.5, I really felt like, oh, he is ready for school. But our public schools didn't take, you had to be 5 in Colorado where we lived. You had to be 5 by the very first week of September, I think. In California, it had been I think it was December 8th or December 6th, that you had to have your birthday. But in Colorado, it was earlier. So I told my husband, I really think our oldest son's name is Tamika, that he was ready for school. And I realized actually it would have been complicated to get him to the local public school because I had all these 3 little children, and I thought, and we only had 1 car, and my husband used the car to go to work, and I thought, I'll have to put them in a wagon because some of them didn't really walk that well, and it would be very slow.
Right.
And so I was trying to work out the logistics. It looked pretty bad, and in Denver sometimes it can be cold and snowy. So in California, where I grew up, the weather was never a problem. So there are many things that conspired against my feeling that it was actually going to work. But my late husband, who was just a great had a very positive view on life, and you know him, Michelle.
So well, yes.
That makes me. Yeah, I'm so happy that you know who he was. But he said, when I told him, he said, well, sweetie, look and find the best school you can for him. And I said, yes, well, honey, they're going to be expensive. He said, don't worry, we'll figure it out. And we were not wealthy at that point. And my father was better off, but my dad was not a fan of my marriage, of a lot of things. I mean, he loved me, but Timber was like, we'll work it out. So I looked at these schools, and many of them wanted to keep your child all day. They wanted the child delivered in the morning, and then you pick them up at the end of the day, which I found a little off-putting. I enjoyed my children. And right at that time, I picked up a book. It was written by a woman whose name I knew. I picked it up in a family bookstore in a completely serendipitous way. But it was called All About Raising Children. I had not read it. I'd sort of started reading it and then put it down. But during this period, I picked it up. I opened it at random. And it was a chapter on the theoretical idea of children being taught at home in the first years of school. And as I read it, I have to say I had a huge epiphany. I was just overcome. This is it. This is what I need to do. I need to teach my little 4.5-year-old at home. And it brought together, I had always wanted to be a teacher. You mentioned I went to Yale, and when I was there, I was one of the first women there, and all of my classmates that I knew. I don't think I can think of one who wasn't going to become either a doctor or a lawyer. But I had never wanted to become a doctor or a lawyer. I wanted to become a teacher. And when I think a few years into my time there at Yale, they began a teacher prep program. I absolutely signed up. It was something, you didn't major in education, you majored in whatever you were majoring in, but you on the side took extra classes and you did your student teaching and you graduated. So I had, when I graduated with my BA, a official thing that said I was a certified teacher, not in Colorado specifically, but it was a Yale teacher certification, which
that totally counts anywhere, I would say, right?
Well, I mean, look, I'll tell you what happened. I mean, I felt that it probably would have some cachet, if I needed it. And when I had this epiphany reading this book, I think I told you, I told my husband, I knew what I was going to do and how I was going to teach to Micah. And I said, don't say anything until I'm all through, because I figured out this elaborate argument why this was a good idea, because I thought he'd think I'd lost it, that I really had gone bonkers this time. This time it was the complete bonkers, sometimes just partial, but not this time. Anyway, so I approached Timber, and I think I told you that I said, okay, please don't say anything. I'm going to teach him at home. And then I said, no, I'm going to tell you why. And I looked at him and I was expecting sort of, a look of consternation, concern. Instead, this huge smile spread across his face. And he looked down at me. He was much taller than me. He looked down and said, honey, this is the best idea you've ever had, which was I will never forget that moment, and which I needed, because, well, we'll go on. So that was my motivation.
That says so much for Timber too, right? I mean, that kind of support when you weren't even expecting that, but how beautiful. Great motivation. I love it.
It was.
So what was the hardest problem in starting your homeschool, starting out, and how did you overcome that challenge? Because we all have different ones, but here you are now. This has been 40 years ago, right? About?
Yes, just about, not quite. Micah's 41. He'll be 42 and he was 4.
Okay, so you were a pioneer.
You can count back. Yeah,
totally a pioneer in this, in doing this. So it wasn't like there were homeschool groups and things that we have now.
I never had heard of it. I never had seen anything about it. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what to call it. It wasn't like they said, which, we of course for many years called it homeschooling. I now feel like home-based education is perhaps a more accurate term for what we do.
That's good.
Because we, instead of being based outside our home, we're based in our home, but we use our home as sort of a center piece, and then we go out in so many different directions to bring so many different opportunities into our children's lives.
Yes.
But you're right, Michelle. Now, but the hardest thing actually was not figuring out what to do or how to teach, or at least I didn't think so. For me, the hardest thing was the anxiety I felt because my father, who I respected very much, was entirely opposed to the idea.
That's hard.
I was very fortunate that my husband was so supportive. My parents didn't really they didn't live near us. I mean, it's nearer than my one living relative. One close relative, my grandmother, lived in Australia, and we lived in California. So that was farther, but my parents lived in California and we lived in Colorado. Mm-hmm. Though by the time I started to homeschool, my father was already, he was the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to serve in the US Congress.
Wow.
And so they were sort of between California and Washington all the time. Mm-hmm. But my dad, busy as he was, and as many important things as he had to do, never failed to call me every day to let me know that I was making a terrible mistake. So that was,
I didn't know
it's true. And he was a wonderful father, and he did a lot to contribute to our homeschool. But that was a steady part of my daily diet, you know, along with family prayers, along with reading the scriptures, along with, you know.
That is so difficult. Oh,
That was my hardest. That was the most challenging thing for me. Now, then, you know, after that, but I was really blessed that my husband was so supportive, and that countered that. I know some women I knew, their husbands were not supportive, and that would be very hard too.
It's true. It's true. And Dale was very supportive when I homeschooled, and that made such a big difference, even though I did the bulk of the homeschooling. But for you to have that support from your husband was huge. But I could see how hard that would be, having your dad tell you that every day.
And he was a very impressive person. You know, he was a tremendous man, a great leader. But education, he had, even though in fact he had given us kind of the template for teaching our children at home, and my father, as supportive as he was of education and as vigorous an advocate as he was, always was pulling us out of school, to the great distress of our school, in particular in high school. My counselor detested me because my dad had very little respect for the need for us to sit in a school building. And so whenever there was something important or interesting, he just had us leave, sometimes for months at a time.
That's such an oxymoron, right?
Completely paradoxical.
Right.
You know, which is important to remember for all homeschooling parents, that truth is often paradoxical. You know, it isn't necessarily linear, and in one way. So I think the next hardest problem were interruptions, you know, that it was, and as you said, Michelle, there was no template. There was, though I did eventually find, through completely serendipitous things, one day, and we didn't watch the news much. We just didn't watch TV very much in our family. But one day, somehow, we were watching TV, and there was a conversation with someone who was teaching their child at home. I think that's what happened. I think it was something like that. Or maybe I heard something on the radio about a person, and I wrote down their name, and because I'd never heard of anybody who did it, you know. And I found then a little network of people in Denver who were teaching their children at home. Most of them were evangelical Christians. They were delightful women. Once in a while, they thought that I was our family, if their children had too much exposure to us, maybe dragged down to the depth of hell. You know, I am not kidding you. Or what is it? Double hockey sticks, HE double hockey sticks. Right. So it was also paradoxical, these wonderful, sweet women with whom I had great experiences, but periodically it would, you know, for example, I remember at one point, I forget what it was. I couldn't become a part of something because I had to pledge that the only word of God was the Bible, and he never will or has said anything else. And I was just not ready to make that pledge. So, I mean, it's just interesting, right?
Yes.
I was absolutely out of that, you know, could not be a part of that. So over the years, we had a lovely LDS group that formed too, that was great. But I loved that first group of women and I still love them, you know, but it was, you know, you learn to have a lot of pieces. You understand truth is not one thing, you know, and you have to be able to handle that. So interruption, go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
No, just the interruption is a big one, which I just did. I'm sorry, I apologize. It's so hard on these forums. Sometimes you think the other person's done, but
I talk too much.
I would love to hear what a typical day looked like. Now, I lived with you my senior year of high school, so I got to see a little glimpse, but I want other people to kind of know. And frankly, it helped me to see that it wasn't exactly this and this and this and this, because it helped me in my homeschooling to know that it's okay for different things to happen, and you do have those interruptions and you do have other challenges. So maybe you can share what an almost typical day looked like.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I think that you know, I'm going to circle back to the interruption for 1 minute because
Oh,
at the outset, this is still a part of our typical day. So when I started to homeschool, my oldest, as I said, was not yet 5. The next one was probably then it was 3. She was 3, you know, and then we had the other one was 1.5, and then we had a baby, something like that, you know, more or less like that. I was rabid to prove to my dad that these kids, not only would they be, you know,
right.
okay, they were going to hit the ball out of the park. It was a little much, you know. So I really, anything at that point in my life that was not focused on academically enriching my children's little brains or teaching them to read, which of course both of them read by the time they were 5. But I mean, I was stuffing it down their little throats. And I remember being so disappointed that, you know, I teach them because I had a teacher's credential, but it was for teaching high school social studies, not for teaching little children how to read. And so I was stunned that these smart little kids, I would teach them something and they'd see the word in the next sentence and they had no idea what it was. You know, I was just like, what is that? What is that about? It took me a long time to wind back and understand. How long does it take you to learn things? A long time. You know, by the time, so
Yes.
it wasn't that long, but it felt long and tedious to me teaching them to read. But in retrospect, I think that that focus on academic things was not necessary. You know, academic stuff is important, but learning to clean your room is important, and learning to do the dishes is important, and learning to all of those things, you
Those
know,
life skills. Yes.
that and they did learn them eventually, because eventually I had to get real, you know. I mean, I did, but and I think that you know, I had so many children. I had a big family and no training at all as to what that would mean. So eventually I was, you know, I had my nose above water, and it was like, you know, and the children had to help or we would have drowned.
Yes, I can only imagine. Well, I mean, I saw a little bit, but just the beginnings, and then I was able to watch, you know, over the years, just more from a distance. But you simply amaze me.
Let me tell you what our typical day. The one thing that was always there, and I think you knew that, was we prayed and read the scriptures at the beginning of the day. Now that was an evolving activity too. We did it in different ways at different times. And I will say I began by sharing, and I don't know if I have a copy of it here, sharing with my children the Bible stories. First of all, the My Bible Friends books, and then the Bible Stories books. And we loved that. But I will say that come heck or high water, I did that every day. Sometimes it seemed like I did nothing else in an organized fashion. And I want to share that with families, that spiritual education, whatever it is for you that you give your children, is, I believe, the foundation for everything else. And if you can, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, I love that, because you, last night as we were talking, you told me how that made such an impact on you because your mom read those to you, and how it gave you that base that you wanted and that you needed the rest of your life. So I agree.
Exactly. And you know, I wasn't given other religious education as a child at all. My father was very sour on religion after the Holocaust. His Christian neighbors had helped turn in his family to be sent to the gas chambers. And so, you know, he didn't think highly of, he didn't think highly of Christianity, but he didn't think highly of Judaism either, because, you know, because they were Jews, because that was their identity, they were rounded up as, you know, sacrificial, whatever. I don't know, not even sacrificial, but just, so my dad didn't think highly of religion. He didn't want us really to be brought up in an organized religion. He allowed us to go to Unitarian Sunday school. And I will say I learned a lot, that they had lovely literature there. And I recommend their books to any homeschooling family. The books they have on, I think they're called Adventures from Many Lands or something like that. And they're wonderful stories that tell the story of different faiths all over the world. And I am grateful for that foundation we had. But
I like
so on a day that was not good, we got up, we had family prayer, we had breakfast, I read the scriptures. If it was a good day, we proceeded. This was before you came to visit us, I think, Michelle, maybe then, we had I had little desks and everybody would sit down, and I would start teaching them something. I don't know exactly what my schedule was at the beginning, but of course I had my almost 5-year-old, I had my 3-year-old, then I had my 1.5-year-old, and then the baby. So it was sort of making this all work. And at the time, I still thought it needed to look like a classroom, and feel like it.
Yes.
That was challenging.
And that is challenging, because I think that's what we're used to, right? So we do what we're used to. And exactly. I do remember that in watching you at the beginning, because when I lived there, they would go around the table, they'd sit around the table and they would do their homework. But I noticed over the years how things got to be, because you saw their successes without having to be as regimented later on, that it got more relaxed in many ways. And they still excelled incredibly well.
I want to say one thing about that, which is really funny. So, you're right. Eventually we moved around the table. At first I had little desks, then we moved to the table, then we moved. But I remember when my youngest children, because, I had altogether 12 living children. And when my youngest children were probably about, I don't know, maybe 9, 10, I thought, gee, I've been very relaxed. I don't know how these guys are going to do. I hope they've learned as much as the others.
Right.
And it was very gratifying to me that my oldest 3, all of the kids did very, very well and amazing academic things. But my oldest 3 went to Yale, which I felt was kind of a gift, that these children got in very young to this extremely prestigious university. It was, for me, I felt a special gift because of my father, and it was sort of like,
absolutely. Yes.
They also got into Stanford. They got into all these schools, and they were transferring. They started college very young at a little place close to our home. So they transferred. Mm-hmm. They were still young. My oldest one was 18 when he was a junior at Yale. So, they transferred and they were young to start. But It was gratifying to me that the 3 with whom I felt like, well, I wasn't as focused with these guys, they also got into Yale. So,
yes, yes, it's a beautiful testimony to what you did. And I'm sure it felt so good to you, for your dad, to see how things progressed and what you were able to do.
He didn't see it all because, he died before the youngest ones did go to college. But he told me many times, he said I was wrong. And which was big. Very sweet. My dad didn't say that often.
That's so big.
And and he said it in the sweetest way, and it was gratifying.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yeah. But
what are some of your favorite memories that stand out the most in your homeschooling? And I know there's so many. It would be nice to go through all of them, but what are your top favorites?
Well, I think that for me, my most favorite memories, even though we took wonderful trips and we had incredible adventures, was reading with my children. That was my favorite memory. I have to tell you, and it was something we did every single day. And if there was something I wouldn't have wanted to miss, that was it. We could have had one less trip to Europe or one less, fantastic voyage across the country and gone to one less national park, even though I loved all those things. But reading with my children was my favorite memory.
That's beautiful, because it's so catalyst to how well they do. And that's very evident, right? I love that. So we talked a little bit about travel. and incorporating it into your homeschooling, because I know that was so big, not only for you, but for your dad, even when you had kids, to do traveling. And how did this influence your kids, the travel?
Well, I'm going to give you a little backstory, and that is, I told you how much I traveled when I was younger.
Yes.
Traveled all the way up until, the time that I got married. I did a lot of travel that to others would have seemed kind of amazing, to travel as much as I was given the opportunity. When I got married, my thing was I wanted to have a family. And I didn't care about vacations. I didn't care. My husband and I did not really take an official vacation with the kids till we had been married for at least 7 or 8 years.
Oh,
and
wow.
That I was all in. I'm sure we traveled during that period, but they weren't vacations. Our life sort of demanded it. Oh yeah, he did a lot of traveling, for his work. But I was very content to be fully focused on this project of my children and teaching them. And I think that focus is super important. Eventually, travel found us. Since we had so many children, it wasn't the idea of traveling like I did all over the world, with my parents, just the two little, we stayed in one hotel room, always my dad, he went through very funny maneuvers where it wasn't clear that families could stay. My father, having been brought up in a society where you had to be counterculture to survive, to escape the Nazis and escape the Russians, certain kinds of rules were not very important to him. And sometimes he would put us in the same, my mother, my sister, and me all in the same sweater and bring us up to the room because he figured nobody would know the difference.
I've never heard these stories.
Oh no, I know. I don't think I've told them often, but you couldn't do that when you had 7, 8 children. let alone that my husband, his work actually at that point did take him to Europe a lot, but eventually my kids had many opportunities to travel with their grandparents, which was sometimes difficult because we had other things on the agenda. We had things that were planned and things that were scheduled, and every time my husband and I would actually pray about it, and usually the Lord would say, let them go. And it was oftentimes reluctantly, but they had wonderful experiences. We did take family trips to Europe on occasion. My husband really believed in the beauty of this country that we live in. And so we first got an 8-seater van. And I remember traveling with him to Florida with the kids and to Texas. These were oftentimes work related, but we had lots of fun in between. Took us to many national parks. Then we got a 12-seater van. And then we got an old Bluebird school bus, which he adapted and made it into sort of a motorhome.
I remember.
With hammocks and a little bathroom. And so for me, that was a great adventure because I knew Europe much better than I knew the United States. I was quite intimate with Europe. You dropped me there anywhere and I was quite comfortable. I didn't need any help. I didn't know the wonders of America as much. And so that was a wonderful adventure for me as well, whether we were going to Mesa Verde or to Yosemite or to the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone, which we loved, or the Grand Tetons, or and then finally in that Bluebird school bus, after traveling all these places, we took our first kids to Yale, and on the way back, which was kind of hard leaving them, we went and we saw the wonderful church historic sites in New York and Vermont and Nauvoo. So, I just want to say that travel is a great adventure. You can do it with children, as you know, Michelle.
Yes.
But you don't need to go abroad. There is a lot of traveling you can do close to home too.
I love that you added that because it's so true. The U.S. has incredible places, and it sounds like you did a lot of learning on the road with your kids, and that travel.
We did.
Right. And that travel really was incorporated even though it was here. And I think that's great because there's so much American history, so much history, so many incredible things to see that are around us. Sometimes we forget to see those and we see the things that are far away. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
I want to say one
Yes.
thing that occurs to me on this, two things. One is, I told you my dad was in Washington, so my kids spent a lot of time in DC, where there are incredible museums, as you know, and they're all free. But they became very, very at home in the Smithsonian, in the National Gallery, in places like that. Most of our communities have wonderful museums. Take advantage of them. People have invested a lot in telling the stories that can be found there. So whether you're at the Louvre, and I want to say something about that, one of my dear friends, I won't go into it, but her mother was my mother's favorite teacher when my mother became a teacher, recently told me that Eventbrite does these virtual tours online now. And I really think you should look into them if you're at home teaching your kids. To the Louvre, to the Machu Picchu, and you are there going through it on the, and I think that is a fabulous way to introduce your children to the wonders of the world.
That is phenomenal. I love that you've added that because I actually saw that and I didn't even think about adding that in. So yes, and it's great because it's all online. Yes.
Isn't that incredible? Now, in America, I will say, moms and dads and families, Disney World, Epcot is amazing. I went to Epcot after I'd actually visited I'd been to most of the places that they have there. Norway, Mexico, France, England, they have these, Japan. Disney does, China. Disney does such a great job at Epcot, reproducing these places in miniature. It's a lot easier than actually being there. It's cleaner, it's nice, but it really recreates the atmosphere of those places. And I think it's an incredible resource that we have.
Well, Disney didn't know you were going to put a plug in for them. I haven't even been. So that's
Michelle, you've got to go. It's even better after you've traveled the world. You're there and you're like, this is amazing.
Because it's so similar.
I remember sitting in Japan and I had a moment where I was like, I thought I was in Japan. I was like, no, this is Disney. It was fantastic. So I really encourage using that wonderful resource.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks for putting that in. So I know we talked about this a little bit too, but what did you do on your difficult days or during difficult times? What did you do to maybe step back a little bit and be able to take care of you when you had all of these kids to take care of?
Yeah, I think taking care of me, I loved hearing from Natalie and others that they believe that is part of what they want to teach their children, that is important and that they do it. I definitely didn't make it a priority. I think I went to a hairdresser once every 5 years. I really think so. I don't think I think my hair, I just had long hair. And it may have been even less. Well, I went to the hairdresser when Charity was born. And so that was maybe 4 years, or 4.5 years into my marriage. I remember that. And I did try to read whenever I could, but even in those years, for me, I had to get it down to the essentials. So the essentials for me became, now the truth is I did have, 2 graduate degrees, one from Yale, one from Stanford, and an undergraduate degree from Yale. I had read a lot.
Yes.
So, and I used to love reading, but after all of that school, which you don't want to do that to your children, after all that high level education, I was kind of sick of books. Which I love books. Books are my favorite.
I love your honesty.
Yeah, I'm just telling you. So,
yes.
The important thing was to read the scriptures. I did that. And then I tried to read something that gave me some inspiration or insight or helped me with some issue. This is a little bit funny. This was later in my life. Some of the kids were older and some were sort of middle-aged and some were little. I was teaching my kids still at home, and my kid said to me, Mom, what are you reading? And I said, oh, I've got this fantastic new book, How to Give Your Children a Classical Education at Home, by Ruth Wise Bauer or whatever, and, her mother, Ruth Wise and Susan Wise Bauer, and I said, Mom, please stop reading it. You're crazy. You're acting crazy with us now. So,
I've read that book.
so,
yes, that's funny.
I love the book. I love the things that Susan Wise Bauer has done, and I loved Ruth Wise's insights into homeschooling. It was very interesting to me. Of course, I read it many years after I'd been homeschooling, but she explained that she had sent her children to school, but she had sort of taught them before they went to school, and she saw them slowly just moving backwards. And that's why she took them out of school, that they just weren't keeping up. So what I did for me, I loved being with my kids, which was good.
Yes.
And I actively worked to enjoy that time. I enjoyed reading with them. That I did enjoy. And we had everything from, from the Bible stories to, we loved Gerald Durrell, who wrote a wonderful book called My Family and Other Animals, and many other books, he was a naturalist with a great gift. How Do You Spank a Porcupine? I mean, these were really wonderful. Birds, Beasts, and Relatives. I have them here.
Awesome.
Look at this. I know. Some of them I have. They're propping up my thing. Okay. Delays of place. But we really loved My Family and Other Animals. We loved the Gilbreth books, which were Cheaper by the Dozen.
Yes.
About these big families. That was really fun. And then, of course, I read to them, and this I highly encourage you to do. I read a lot of Greek mythology. We used the D'Aulaire Greek myths for the young children, and then they went off. I loved all kinds of, Norse mythology. I loved, Shakespeare. We read Charles and Mary Lamb's Shakespeare for Children, which I think was great. I liked adaptations, though, for example, with the scriptures, we did read the straight scriptures with our kids as they got older, in particular, as the kids were, some of them were in seminary, that, we did that. But I did enjoy reading adaptations too. And the richer the storyline, the better, to keep them involved and excited by the wonderful stories.
I love that. So you have a wide range, excuse me, a wide range of books that you used with them. Did you use any particular curriculum or like a favorite that you use all the time or most of the time? I didn't. Part of it was we were young and poor. I was very fortunate when I began to homeschool. We looked into the laws, and in Colorado, there wasn't much said about teaching your children at home because it wasn't a thing yet. Right.
But there was something on the books, and it was that if you did not send your children to school, you had to buy a state-approved curriculum. And they were all at least $2,000 per child, which in those days, for us, was prohibitive. But there was one other little part of the law. And that was that if you had a teacher's credential, you could teach your children at home. And I had that little paper from Yale, And so for me, that was great. It wasn't a Colorado State credential. So simultaneous to teaching the kids, I took a number of graduate courses, and I ended up taking the teacher placement test, which was a big boost to my ego because I was like, I was going to try to study for it, but I ended up studying for it for 2 hours, the day before I had to take it. And it went well. I didn't think it had gone well. I thought the math part especially, but that was gratifying. It was like, well, yes. I guess I'm as qualified as the average teacher. But the thing is that I did not use a specific curriculum. I used inspiration. I did use something out of Berkeley, California. They had these workbooks for math that were really, I liked. They still sell them, and I can't remember. They were just little paperback books. I used Saxon. for math
We did as well.
eventually. Yeah. It's a little boring, but it's very complete and thorough, I think, you know.
Yes.
I used lots of things, you know, I used math manipulatives. I was always trying to find good things to teach. Oh, you know what I loved and I used a lot were the great courses. The great
Oh,
courses
yeah.
are mostly college courses, but they have a number of excellent courses that are suitable for kids. This was before the age of remote learning, you know, that everybody's
Right.
doing remote.
Right. And
But
you shared that with me, the great courses. But I think a
and
lot of what you're saying, it sounds like you used really a lot of mentors and classics in your education.
I did. And we did, you know, and I sort of thought through it. As you know, I mean, I did come from a very education oriented background. So I thought through what are the things they need. The most important thing I think, Michelle, that I did was when you talk about the me time, I took time every year. I didn't, some people I hear go on retreats, do that. No, but I just took time to ponder each one of my children and what they needed and what were my goals for them. You know, and I did that. I can't hear you, Michelle.
I said I love that. So I
Okay.
think that's so
And
important because they're so different.
and I do feel that I know that most moms are going to have probably a little more linear system than I did. But I will say that that time to think about your child and what really you want that child to accomplish. Don't be too nervous about the guidelines that the schools have. Because that can kind of get you nervous and anxious. It got me nervous and anxious. And of course, it was silly. Charity, truly my star daughter. I didn't have favorites, but Charity, we haven't spoken about Charity, but Charity was my fourth baby, and she said from the time she was very young she wanted to grow up to be a great artist, and
she
and
did.
She did, actually she did, but she practiced her art often on things like our walls, which would make us kind of upset, or she would be, I mean, there are lots of her clothing. She liked to draw on her clothing. She actually did become a lovely artist, but she became an opera singer. And she did not read. When she was 8, she was still not reading well. And it would drive me crazy. I think she probably had some dyslexia, though, you know, we never uncovered it, in fact. And by the time she started college when she was 14 years old, it was kind of irrelevant. And when she graduated when she was 18 years old, and then went on, you know, to go to the top vocal conservatories in the world, went to Hungary and the Liszt Academy, the Peabody Conservatory, and then make an incredible life for herself in the midst of many, many, many health challenges. And the only reason I mention her in particular is don't be worried if one of the children isn't doing everything you feel they should be at the moment they should be.
I love that.
Because
they're all so different and at different times. But I'm
exactly.
glad you actually brought up her story, because I'd love to have you just tell a little bit more so those that are listening can hear a little bit more of her incredible life and legacy.
Ask me the rest of the questions, Michelle, though, that you wanted to.
You want to go to that first? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. If you were to say there was one mistake that you made that you do differently, I know as a homeschool mom, I did more than one. I can just say that. But what would be the one thing, and what would you do differently?
There is one thing, the anxiety.
Oh.
It should not be a time. Enjoy. I mean, yes, you know, being a mom, we can't enjoy every minute. You know, we have so much to do, but try to enjoy every minute. I did enjoy a lot of it, but I regret, my dear, sweet husband, who Michelle knew, was a very hardworking guy, and he was awakened too many times by me at 3 a.m. when suddenly I was overcome with the conviction that I was failing my children and that they would not be able to. I knew they could read, but they wouldn't spell properly, or they wouldn't, something. They would have some academic shortfall that would then keep them from being able to function as a happy person in the world. I mean, that was really crazy, but I did. And I would wake Timber up, and he was very nice. He'd get up, he'd listen to me, and he'd say, okay, Chatterbox. He said, they're doing great. Just go back to sleep. They're doing great. I'd say, you say that because you aren't teaching them every day.
You know what? I actually love that advice, though, because I had a lot of anxiety, and I didn't have a dad calling me, telling me I made the wrong decision, but I felt like, oh, I don't know if I'm not going to be able to do enough for my kids. What if I've ruined their lives? And I remember calling you many times and saying, Annette, I don't know. So I called you on those days that I was.
By that time I knew it worked, but by that time I had kids who had started college when they were 14 and 15 and aced it, so it's like, oh, guess what? It was absolutely ridiculous to be worried. I was doing way too much.
Yeah, but it's hard when you're in the midst of it. So I think that's what's so good to hear from you, who is this homeschool mom, and it helped me.
It is my most important thing that when you get, and it's also about the self-care. When you're overwhelmed, this is advice that I got from a wonderful, one day, I'll never forget this day. I was in our old house, Michelle, which you knew well, on Zenobia Street, and I was up in our bedroom, our yellow flowered wallpaper bedroom, and sitting on the floor and probably folding laundry, and I had National Public Radio on the radio, and there was a story about a boy who had gotten into Harvard and who had never gone to school, who had been taught at home by his parents. Mm. It was almost as epiphanal as when I decided to homeschool. Tears were streaming down my face. I was just beside myself. The family to whom that boy belonged, the parents were Steve and Mickey Colfax, and they had 4 sons. I think at least one was adopted. They homesteaded in Northern California, and eventually they came out with a book. It was around that time, maybe it was a little later, called Homeschooling for Excellence. Mm-hmm. And in that book, she gives all kinds of ideas, most of which I didn't use, all the books to use and this and that. But there was a question, there was sort of a Q&A at the end, and somebody said, what happens when you're burned out? And I was like, yeah, I'm burned out all the time. No. But what happens when you're burned out? She said, just stop. She said, stop, don't do anything. Stop for a month, she said, your kids will not stop learning. The biggest piece that I'll say is you need to be careful what you don't do. Don't let your kids sit in front of screens all the time. I know screens can be very helpful and constructive, but it needs to be controlled. And even the good stuff, the bad stuff really needs to be controlled. And it should be, because I think that those things can weasel their way into their brain and become addictive. It's just like junk food, yes, or junk drugs.
Yes.
The wrong kind of stuff on screens is addictive. But if you keep that away, there's so much for them to learn that if you aren't teaching them, they're going to be just drawing and reading and playing and exploring, and they're still going to be learning.
I remember many times calling you, and you gave me that advice, and it was so good. Don't worry if you have to take a week off, or you have to take even a month off. And I remember thinking, I don't even think I can take a day off. Like I did. So it was so good to hear. I mean, you really helped bring my mindset to a place of reality, and helped me to be a little bit calmer and, what's the word? Just be able to really focus on my kids and not let that anxiety overtake what I was trying to do and enjoy them.
Have confidence,
yes,
that if you were given the opportunity to bring those children into the world, or to take the care of those children into your life, as you do with a child who's adopted, which we had to, that you will receive the inspiration, if you're seeking it, to be a wonderful guide for that child. If you are willing to give the time, effort, and energy to it, you are the person who has been gifted with what is necessary to lead that child wonderfully. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean you won't find other people and other mentors and other opportunities to bring out all of their talents and gifts. Yes, you will. And that is a really important thing that I don't want to forget. Do remain very in tune to these intuitive moments. Capture them. When you have a thought, this might be good for my child, don't file it. Write it down and try to follow through on it in one way or another. You may not be able to do it immediately, but don't lose those thoughts.
I love
they
that.
are valuable. I learned that, Michelle, you wanted me to talk a little bit about charity, and I want to say this, that I'm not going to say Charity's story now, but at one point Charity was in the hospital with her chest open for almost 2 weeks with it was like saran wrap, press and seal saran wrap on her chest. You could see it in there, her heart beating, everything.
As a mom.
And I was sitting by her side, blood flowing out of her body for the days after the surgery, blood just flowing out. It looked like it would never stop. And I was really, it was hard. But amazingly, the night before this surgery happened, kind of unexpectedly, it was her first bilateral lung transplant. I had been here in Colorado and had been over at Regis University, where all my children started their college adventures. My 2 youngest daughters had started school there, and there was the beginning of the year special activity, and it was a mentalist. A mentalist is someone who is not exactly a magician, though some of what they do is magic. Some of it is simply keying in to these thoughts that we just let by. I had seen him once before. When I heard he was coming, I, who am always late, as Michelle knows, was the first person waiting to be able to be in this performance, which was just in the student commons area there in their cafeteria. After it, I went up and bought these 2 books from him that he had written. And I put them in my bag when I went, my very small bag, when I left very unexpectedly the next morning to be with Charity, and got there after the transplant. Was already underway and waiting for 12 hours. And when she came out, the doctor said, "I'm sorry, it was too late." He said, "If I would have known how sick she was, I would have never done this operation." I said, "But they told me she's in recovery." He said, "Yeah." He said, she already died on the table and we resuscitated her. And he said, "She is on every form of life support we have. And I just don't see a path to her coming through on the other side."
Every mom has to just take a deep breath when you hear this.
It is inconceivable until you're in the midst of it, though I will say, when he said it, I had some very wonderful, strong spiritual experiences. I said, "No, you got her through the surgery. She's going to live." But as I sat there with, so I was I'd had wonderful blessings, insights, experience with my late husband, where I felt, there are lots of, transcendental things I could share with you that were wonderful. But what I want to say, because this is relevant, whether you have a faith path in life or you don't, you are going to be gifted with inspiration for your child. Okay. And this book, so as I sat there, with Charity, just thinking, and we had really wanted her to get this transplant. She didn't want to get one. But the doctors had said, if she doesn't, she will die. She'll die either in 6 weeks or 6 months, but she's going to die very soon. So it had been a huge thing to convince her to go ahead with it. She had had a wonderful spiritual experience that finally pushed her over the top. But as we sat there, I thought, how could I have done this to my daughter? It would have been better for her she was so dynamic and full of life, to live until her last moment than rather sit here, like this. But I brought that book with me, and it had, I don't want to get there. First of all, I had a dear friend. He was the congressman in that area, and he came to visit us, and he saw me looking very down. He said, "Annette, Charity right now, you can't draw any strength from her. She needs to feel," he said, "you and I both know that death is not the worst thing. He said, you and I both believe that things go on. He said, but right now, Charity needs to feel from you complete conviction that she's going to make it. And it looks like she's not feeling, but that's what you need to give her. And it really resonated and it helped me. And then at that point, I started reading this book whenever I could. You can't really, when you're really involved with someone who's sick, you don't have that much time to read. But one thing that he said, some people call it the Holy Ghost. Some people call it their conscience. Some people call it Jiminy Cricket. Some people call it, he said, those flashes are powerful things in your life and you need to be open to them. So in a way now by that time, for many, many, many years, I had been blessed with the gift of the Holy Ghost, which I did use. But at that moment, I started using it in a much more aggressive way. And any thought that came to me, I would tell the doctors, maybe we should try this, maybe we should try that. Fortunately, we had a wonderful doctor who took it very seriously because they thought she was going to die.
Right.
So anything I said, they were like, okay, we'll try that. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Okay. And we did so many things that just came to me. And I'm not sure if that's what saved Charity's life, but I will say that her magnificent surgeon, who twice gave her new lungs, because this was not the first lung transplant Charity had. When she left the hospital that first time, and I was very nervous about leaving, but I went to him and I said, thank you so much. You don't see the surgeons often. I said, you saved my daughter's life. And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, no. He said, I thought she was going to die. I told you I thought she was going to die. He said, it was something else. So with all the brain power that there is in the world, whether it's at Yale or at the Cleveland Clinic, you as your child's parent, if you tap in to that inspiration you will receive for that child, are going to be the best person to bring that child through the challenge of childhood, through the challenge of reading, through the challenge of a double lung transplant, through a challenge of a brain injury, I mean, and yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, you,
Just
Michelle.
Such wise advice, because we often have these things or thoughts or feelings, right? And sometimes we doubt ourselves. So I love that you share this so profoundly with such great examples, because it's so true. And I think just even that, like, the next question is about getting into college and what were the most important things. So that would go along with how to help them too, is keep that inspiration going and those thoughts.
I mean, doesn't it seems so crazy. Here you've had your kid at home. How are you going to make that look good for a college? You guys are in a much easier place in a sense than we were. We had the advantage that it was very novel still.
Yes.
It was a very novel thing. One thing, being novel, there are lots of ways into college. We ended up, we had a wonderful little Jesuit university near our home. I mean, close enough that the kids could ride their bike, they could rollerblade, they could walk easily. It was maybe a mile from the house. Mm-hmm. And that is where we started this college journey when my first one was very young. I would encourage you to look for opportunities while you're homeschooling still, to give your children some pieces that let a college see that they may be okay. What we did with Tomika, before he got in, he had to take the, I think he took the ACT. I had taken the SAT, so it was a little bit different for me. And we spent a little time having him prepare for that. He did, not a lot of time, but a little. I remember, I remember because I had a baby. I had a baby during this time that he was going to start. We were hoping he would start college at Regis. And I was in the hospital. Usually I had babies at home too, but this time I was in the hospital, and he was there, and I had him with this book just taking practice ACTs, while I was in the hospital with baby. You have to remember, you don't need to be in a school. I taught kids a lot of stuff in hospitals in the end, because of charity.
Oh, right.
Whether it was long distance over the phone, you know, where I'd be over the phone, I'd look at what they were doing on the computer, and give them feedback from the hospital room, or I had Zenny who was with me, and Zen, you know, doctors adopted him and let him come with them into surgeries, and he learned a lot that way.
Wow.
But you know, every difficult circumstance you are in, and this relates to the college prep entry, all the challenges, all the weirdnesses, all the different things you've done, most of them not contrived, as oftentimes they are when kids are in regular school. They have all kinds of contrived activities to make them look like they are doing service. I don't want to say they're all contrived, but I will say, you know, sometimes it's like, we need to fill this space. But life itself can bring you a lot of opportunities for service, for learning, for travel,
yes,
for creating something new. All of that, things that are different about your life, can be things that will help your child get into college. You need to learn to frame them wisely, to be able to see the larger picture. You know, what we used to go, one of our favorite things was, there was a place, I'm sure you came with us, Michelle, to Frankie Ford, where it was just out past Aspen Grove, and it was just sort of a lovely mountain wilderness area with a river running through it here. And during our children's, when our oldest children were just getting to this college-bound age, there were terrible fires there. And before that, when that happened, my kids were so upset. And they organized a thing called the Riparian Restoration Project. Anyway, they worked on trying to restore that habitat. And that was a wonderful thing they could write about, you know.
That's lovely. And it wasn't that you directed it necessarily, they did.
Exactly. You know, Eagle projects had lots of wonderful things in them, you know, that they did service. And so you need to learn to tell your children's story in a wonderful way. Now, colleges expect homeschoolers to be applying. So I know with my kids, in at least, and that was a while ago now, but there was a thing for a special application piece for homeschoolers, you know, that the parent who was most in charge of the home education needed to write up a thing about their child. And that was a great opportunity, because you know that child intimately. And it's important. I'll tell you something. Do not repeat this. My last child, my husband was in a terrible automobile accident. Michelle may tell you, when my youngest was 11 years old. And I will say that if you have a partner, treat that partner with a lot of love, because it is better to have a partner. It is harder. You can do it without. I mean, I had to do it I had 4 young children at home when he died, but not babies. We know people, you know, mine was much easier than mom whose husband dies suddenly. I had friends, incredible family. The husband dropped dead when he left it. He had a brain aneurysm or something, and left her with 6 little children. The good news is you will get help. You will get help from heaven. You will get help from places you couldn't imagine, and you will be able to rise and face any challenge if you are open to the inspiration and help that is available to you. But I will say this, that my youngest, when he applied, he started college here locally, and that was easy, because by that time they'd had all these star students from my family that all you had to do is show a face, and I made them take the SAT or ACT, but the college didn't care anymore. They were like, oh yeah, we want you. But so he got into that easily, and he was fine. But then he wanted to transfer, and I knew that I needed to write this essay for him, and he was challenging for me. And I needed to ponder and pray and ponder for almost 3 weeks to see him as others saw him. He was a fantastic kid. He was accomplished. He had done many wonderful, wonderful things. To let go of all the mom stuff that was bugging me in a major way, and see my child for the amazing human being that he really was. It's terrible admission, but it's true. I was able to write something that really, I think, captured that.
No, but I love that you're so real and that you share those kind of moments, because then other moms who are feeling that will really not feel bad that maybe that it can be a normal thing, right?
That's my
To have
hope
those
because
moments.
I mean, they're all, I am blessed. I have wonderful, I have 10 wonderful living children and 2 wonderful children waiting for me above. And, and then I have my little twins, I had little stillborn twins, and, I've heard those are going to be returned to us in the millennium to raise. But, but I will say that, it is so important to realize that the imperfections are part of the journey. And this is really important. The journey is
Mm.
for you. The most important self-care is learning the lessons that you are learning from your children, from the challenges, from the joys, from the things that are going to put you close to losing it in a big way, or you do lose it. You know that that's not good. You know that that's something you need to work on. It's not their problem. It's your problem. And they are what you have been given to help you learn to become the person you can become. So homeschooling
Mm.
is a better university. I've been to Yale twice. I have a graduate degree and an undergraduate. I've been to Stanford. I have a graduate degree from Stanford. No university as good as being a mom who's teaching her children at home and really giving it her all and learning from her children to become the best person she can become.
Okay, I don't know how we could end it any better than that, other than I feel like we jumped over. I mean, everything was so great and so much good, wise advice for the homeschooling moms that are thinking about it or that are in the midst of it right now, to hear from somebody who's so experienced and went from A to Z. So you could see where your kids went, after that initial stressful time. But I feel bad to jump over Charity. And I want you to know that all of Annette's kids are extremely amazing and incredible. And you need to go listen to Charity. She's got a couple TED Med talks, and I'm sure many more. So look at
She has lots. She has so many. I mean, her TED and TEDx talks are really good. She has TED Med, TEDx, um, and I mean, she has a wonderful book, called The Encore, which
yes.
you can get from the library. You can get the audio book, and that is a wonderful story.
And it's
But
in her actual voice, and that's what we love too. That helps to remember her by. And
it's not her whole story because
no,
when
that's
that story came to the end, Cherry was still, even though she had, I'm trying to think if by the time she finished the encore, she'd had the second transplant. I think she had when she first finished the encore, but
Mhm.
it did not even touch on the story of the cancer that unfortunately was then
Right.
Initiated by probably by the medications, the immunosuppressants.
Mhm.
Now the bottom line is still that Cherry had 2 transplants. They gave her 12 or 15, 12 years, maybe more, of incredible life that she lived to the absolute maximum.
Absolutely. Yes.
She was diagnosed with an idiopathic illness when she was not quite 21 years old. When she was 20 years old, and idiopathic means they don't know what causes it. It was a lung disease, but she was an opera singer. That's what her goal was. She went on to become an incredible opera singer. She was determined it would not stop her. And Charity's story to me is important because this is what you're trying to raise. Children who at their core have confidence that they can become who they need to become, who they want to become,
Yes.
and nothing is going to stop them.
Mm.
And even though not all children may act like that at every juncture, you still can pour that kind of confidence, self-confidence, confidence in their destiny and that they can fulfill their destiny. You can do that at home better probably than any place else. I don't want to say only at home, but guiding them and helping them find the right opportunities. Charity, after she got the cancer, what was really hard is she was born an exceptionally beautiful child. Michelle knows because Michelle was there when she was born.
Yes.
I was pregnant with Charity. You were there. You left the night before she was born, I think, Michelle.
Oh, no,
you were
actually,
there.
I was in the hospital. I was down
Oh, were you?
rooms with everybody else. Yep, I was there.
Oh, you were there. Yeah, and then and you went over to your house for a while, I think, didn't you, with Dulcia and stuff? But
yes,
Charity was an exceptionally beautiful baby, and she grew into an exceptionally beautiful girl. She was in Miss Colorado, and she was working her way, in these. She would not let us ever say that because she was embarrassed by it. But I mean, she shouldn't be, because I'll tell you what, that brings up, pay attention when there are contests, when there are things like that for your kids. I didn't choose that for Charity. She wanted to do it for the platform and for the money, but she didn't really want anybody to know she was doing it. But it's, it's a little bit, these contests are sometimes a little bit of a, what do you call it? An obstacle course. You need to do it like Miss Colorado. Nobody in Colorado is Miss Colorado till they've done it at least 4 or 5 times. That's the way it goes. Nobody goes in and wins. Doesn't happen. So you learn things like that. But she had been working her way up. She was, by this time she was, and she was beautiful in every way, inside and out. And the cancer attacked her face. She had to have a nerve removed from her thing. She was still beautiful, but she did not look like herself. And that took some serious spiritual, personal searching, which she did. She said, Mom, and now it finally means pretty soon after this happened, this could ruin my life. It feels so awful. She said, but I'm not going to let it. She had so many performances afterwards, but I remember the first one, which was a huge performance in LA, in their huge, their biggest place, performing venue. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of people. And this was the first time she had done one of these huge things since she just didn't look like herself anymore. They had the publicity picture, and then Charity, and she was darling, I mean, it was an astounding response. People were just, one ovation after another ovation after. She was used to that. But I know that it meant a lot when she was she knew that she looked different. But the truth is, she wasn't different. And I think that was an important thing that we realized in a way that we could never have understood it as deeply. What matters is something so intrinsic to who you are. It isn't your intelligence. It isn't your beauty. It isn't your talent. Those are all external manifestations of something that is deeper and who you are. And Charity was able to hold on to that, and everybody who knew her or met her, that's what they experienced. And in some ways, she said to me later, she said, Mom, when I looked the way I looked for most of my life, it was a big calling card, in a way. People immediately wanted to know me. She said, when that wasn't quite the same, in a way, it was even more incredible to relate to people, because I realized people loved me just as much when I was me. They loved me for me. And it wasn't because I looked spectacular, I, radiated this. It was because, and I think that was a really important thing that she learned. She also learned that it is hard. And I think we need to, people who are gifted, not to have had to have that experience, or not to have something that sets them apart. Right now in this whole world where we're talking, people, and it can get too much, what do they call it? Identity politics or whatever it's called. But people who come to this world where they're a different color, they're a different ethnicity, they're different, it can be much harder. And people who are white like we are need to understand that.
Yes.
They need to understand it is not the same. Charity, the reason she was able to do it is because she deep in her heart, but she said it was hard sometimes. She said when her cancers became awful on her face, she said she'd be outside walking and she could see people were afraid of her. You know, this beautiful, incredible child. But I think it's important for us to know that and to have our hearts filled with the recognition of what are the advantages we have.
Yes.
And what is the kind of empathy we should have for others.
I love that. I love the empathy. I love how you talked about the homeschooling and how that trains you for whatever you encounter in life, and no matter what that is. And you've had a lot of hard on this homeschooling journey. You've had a lot of hard things, and how you were still able to mold your kids and move them in that direction and help them be able to see things in a broader, more understanding, loving way than maybe some others. And I hate to cut you off because I could listen to you all day, Annette.
Sorry, Michelle, did I go over?
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. We have learned so much from you today, and I'm so grateful for the words of wisdom and the stories and all that you have shared that will help other mothers and families out there as they are traversing this idea of homeschooling, or if they're already in the midst of it. So I just want to thank you so much. Is there one other word of wisdom that you'd like to share before? You've shared a lot.
I think, yeah, I think that what you said, Michelle, and this, I do want to share this, and that is, I'm going to quickly say, you know, we lost a baby to sudden infant death. We had twins who were stillborn at about 6.5 months. Right. My husband died when my youngest was 11. Charity was diagnosed with this, what was at that point, a critical, incurable disease when she was 21 years old. All of these things, which had the possibility for being so devastating, were actually opportunities to learn and grow. And I think that if you can frame your life and understand that some of the hardest things, if you learn to share them in the right ways with your family, to share the challenge and the lessons, they will help them to become their greatest self. So that's
beautiful.
I think.
Thank you. And nobody could say that almost better than you, because you have been to the depths of many hard and have experienced a lot of incredible, wonderful things as well. So thank you for sharing your heart and your soul and your love and your time with us today. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. I love you.